You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. A series of strange sightings were reported in Aintree near Liverpool in the 1970s and 80s that perplexed the witnesses that encountered it. Groups of white-robed figures carrying torches were seen, and hushed tales of nefarious activities were shared. But just what was going on? Returning to tell us all about this peculiar case is our good friend Dr Rob Gandy, who dives headlong into this strange case. We also cover a couple of strange road ghost cases too. But before that, as always, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/Mysteries and Monsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. You can also click the link in the show notes as always. And thank you to each and every one of my patrons for your continued support. You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for episodes, news and merchandise. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you to Dean Bestall for his marvellous artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. So, let us join Dr Gandy to try and uncover the mystery of the Aintree Spectres. Having a haunted house is more than enough for many people, but imagine coming upon one ghost lurking along a road late at night. Motorists and passengers all over the world have reported encountering spectres whilst out driving or walking, or even they perhaps have picked up one of those notorious phantom hitchhikers. Returning to look into some of these cases, it's a long overdue return for Dr. Rob Gandy. Rob, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me, Paul.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. As I said whilst we were chatting about all things and everything before we started, mostly laughing at each other's football teams. Essentially, it's one of those things where I have to offer a humble apology, Rob, because you were a very popular guest. You've been on twice before, and I can't believe it's been 3 years since we've last had a nice chat. So thank you for coming back.
Oh, no problem. It doesn't seem like 3 years, but then again, I think with everybody since COVID, I think everybody's brains are scrambled.
Yeah, it seems like 6 months, but it is 3 years. It's one of those things. I think that 2020 to 2022 were basically merged into about 3 months, I think, for most of us.
I know what you mean.
So obviously, Rob, you're one of those people that seems to specialise in a specific type of haunting, and obviously when we've spoken previously, we've dove into a couple of interesting cases in regards to this wonderful phenomenon that still seems to hold a real menace to some people who are into the paranormal, which is these strange spectres and ghosts and encounters that people have, whether they're driving or cycling or walking along roads all over, not just the UK, but beyond.
Yep, yeah. I've been steadily collecting these things for the last few years. I did a count recently, and I reckon I've got over 180 first and second-hand testimonies. I mean, as you know, when I say accept, I only pull together first and second-hand testimonies. And I just seem to get them sometimes completely at random. And, somebody will pick up that I did a call for, people to get in touch with me for something in, for argument's sake, Greater Manchester 5 years ago. And then somebody's thinking, I've got problems with ghosts or what have you. Let's see what's going on. And then they Google and they come up with me and then they contact me. And, nothing to do necessarily with what was in the article, but people are often looking for what you might describe as a sympathetic ear. So, it's I'm still trudging along, and I'm currently in the middle of some research, and I've got about 10 testimonies linked to it, which some of them are totally bizarre, but that's the nature of the game, isn't it?
It is, and I think this is one of those things that often perplexes people, because when it comes to certain types of hauntings, there's always people that will try and sort of give you these cliched reasons, Rob, and we'll dive into this, one of these particular cases that we're going to look into some depth shortly. But often there's always these kind of things that, oh, well, it must have been an old church that this road's been built over, or perhaps it's been built over a graveyard. And I think one of the things that's always impressed me about the work you do, Rob, is that you're very diligent in your research and your ability to pull maps up and look at the history of particular areas, because I think 20, 30 years ago, people would tell a ghost story, or they would share ghost stories, or you'd read about them, and it would always be, you know, the headless horseman or the broken-hearted woman.
Yes, the key question is with the headless horseman and the headless horses is, where did they stick the reins?
Very true. Very true. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is one of those perplexing things that often gets overlooked in these kind of stories. And I think as we've developed and as the internet has given us more abilities to be able to sort of search, because I think often in the previous generations of the great ghost hunters that we would have, it would be very difficult for the average person to sort of up sticks and drive to Devon to go investigate a certain haunting or something, Rob. Whereas now you can log on, you can look at maps, you can find the history of a particular area, you can go onto ancestry.com, you can see if these people really did die when they're supposed to have died. And I think we've got a far better ability now to be able to really dive into some of these stories. And it's the ones that survive the forensic eye that I think are the most compelling and the most perplexing, because people will always dismiss these kind of stories, and yet more and more of them, when you look at really good cases or really good events that are happening on a specific area or a stretch of road, Rob, the normal explanations fall away very quickly sometimes. Yeah,
I mean, the thing, as you know, I pretty well focused my efforts, my research is on road ghosts. For reasons that you're familiar with. But what's different about road ghosts compared to some of the haunted locations and whatever, and Danny Robbins has done some really good stuff with the Uncanny, where 3 TV programs, and he's really dug deep into certain locations and the history.
Yes.
The problem with road ghosts is that they are so ephemeral. And any of these episodes tends to last no more than 5, maybe 10 seconds. And then it's gone. And usually, of course, people are driving. That may be 50 or 60 miles an hour. Honest constable, that's what I was doing. I was not exceeding the speed limit. And so the way that I look at it, and this is me, being a statistician all my career, I'm trying to collect lots of bits of data, hoping that there can be some patterns from it, because that's all you can do. You can't say, somebody, one of the typical types is somebody driving down the road, a person steps out in front of them, they run the person over, they're horrified, they get out, they look around the car, under the car, on top of the car, there's nothing there. They get back in the car, completely petrified, drive home, and down 3 large whiskies. Now, and that's it. And that's the problem. There's no more than that. But the thing is, when you actually sit back, you realise that there's a lot of this going on in different places. So, patterns build up. It's strange. Obviously, a lot of people will be having these experiences and won't necessarily tell anybody beyond their immediate family or friends, which means that I'm probably just scraping the surface with my researchers. Yeah,
I suppose one of the most perplexing aspects of road ghosts is obviously the notorious phantom hitchhiker. Do you still get reports of this? Because I mean, this is one of those things as well, because here's a fashion that seems to have completely dropped out of modern living, really, these days, Rob. Not many people hitchhike.
Well, they're all supposed to be dead, aren't they? It's the phantom.
Yes, well, this is the thing. So, do you still get reports of people or people seeing characters thumbing a lift or something like that? Or is it that these are the kind of stories that have completely dropped away and whilst, as you mentioned there, people see these spirits or these figures stepping into the road or wandering strangely around roads. That part of it, the hitchhiker seems to have gone.
In my researches, I have had, I would say, only one case which I could specifically say, hand on heart, is a phantom hitchhiker. But it was a talking phantom hitchhiker. And, it's a cracker, but leave that for another day. But as you say, it's the only one that I've got. Most of them are people driving along roads, something stepping off, or with the Ruskington horror spreading itself all over the windscreen, and what have, or appearing to be sat next to the driver or in the back, rather than anybody, not the Jan Brunvan's classic, normally a young man driving his car down Hanger Lane or Gallows Lane or something like that, and then there's this beautiful young lady, always a woman, thumbing a lift. I mean, those stories have done the rounds because they're good stories, in terms of, in the pub, entertaining your friends, but they've been tracked back decades. But how many of them actually happened? Very, very few. And I think, I was in communications with Jan Brunvan, who's a great guy.
Yes.
I think he's in his 90s now, and he's still fly fishing, and he's still doing skiing and all that in Utah.
Wow.
Super guy. And what he sent me a copy of a paper. I'm going back a few years now, that he wrote a while back, and it was highlighting that things have changed really because of the internet. And whereas people used to rely on going to the pub on a Friday night, seeing the friends, and somebody says, this is what happened to my friend, or no, it was his milkman, or what have you, and tells a story, we all go, wow, that was cool. And then the next thing you do when you go into work, you tell all your friends at work, and so it spreads. These days, if somebody got a story, they'd put it on the internet.
Yeah. And
then they'd share it on Facebook or whatever, and then it'd be forwarded by somebody to umpteen colleagues or people on their circuit, and getting likes and what have you. It's a totally different ball game. And the other side of it is that now you get people who are, I'm not sure if they're professional or semi-professional or what, who have got their YouTube channels and they're zooming out, armed to the teeth with equipment, going around spooky houses or whatever, or what they allege to be spooky houses, and some of them are, questionably, avoiding being breaking and entering, possibly. And so there's money to be made, because you have all these followers and sort of all subscribe to your channel. So it's all changed in many ways. Whether it's changed for the better or not, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, my standpoint is that people do continue to have experiences, and they aren't necessarily... they're often quite reticent about coming forward and telling anybody, other than outside, within their own family or close friends, basically for fear of ridicule. What I'm pleased to say is that I do get people come to me and trust me with their stories, mainly because I promise anonymity and what have you. So, yeah.
Well, it's a good point you bring up there, though, Rob, because strangely enough, in my normal day job, I was mentioning, somebody said, oh, you got an interview tonight, and then Paul, and I said, oh, yeah, and I told them exactly who I was speaking to and what it was going to be about, and they said, oh, yeah, my dad had an encounter with a road ghost when I was a kid growing up. He was driving home one evening and saw a ghost of a horse and rider run across the road in front of him, and he drove through it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, we've worked together 7 years. You've never told me that story. And she went, yeah, we never really believed him, but he's always stuck to it, and he still says it now, 45 years on.
Yeah. that is classic, typical of the situation. And when I was giving a presentation to raise money for the hospice near Southport, Queen's Court, there was an advert out saying Rob Gandy is going to talk about the old man of Halsall Moss, because I collected stories across West Lancashire. And I got this phone call from the hospice and said, would I mind speaking to this guy called John? Because he's seen the advert and he wanted to tell me about his experience, which involved him driving in an E-type Jag at a high speed across the moss and then nearly hitting this farmer. He looked like a farmer in late 19th century farmer's clothing in the middle of the road. He swerved to avoid it, shot. The road was about 6 foot above the surrounding field. He shot through the air and landed about 10, 15 yards away in the field. The way that the structure of an E-type Jag is, don't ask me to describe it in detail because I can't remember the technical words, it should have collapsed on hitting the ground. It didn't. And when he looked back, the farmer had gone. Anyway, after a while, an ambulance came and picked him up, took him to Southport A&E, checked him over, and he was fine. He couldn't understand. He goes back the next day and sees that the car's there, that it's okay. And there's only one house anywhere nearby, about 100 yards away. And so he goes over to it and and thanks the people who live there for ringing for the ambulance. And they said, we didn't ring the ambulance. So somehow the ambulance came out to pick him up from in the field where nobody had seen him. Strange. And the point being that, he got photos that he'd taken of the location and the E-type at that time, probably for insurance purposes, I dare say. But he'd never told anybody for 40 years until he saw me, or saw that I was about to give a talk about a road ghost in that same area. So he told me his story from 40 years ago.
Wow.
It's potluck, it's serendipity. And that's what I find. I just keep an open mind and open channels and hope that a new case will, come forward. And often they do from the most unexpected directions. One of which I'm going to talk about tonight.
Indeed. So, for anybody that's not aware, obviously Aintree is a name synonymous in British horse racing and probably horse racing around the world as well as one of the most well-known venues in the country.
Arguably the most famous race, horse race in the world, as you say.
So how did the Aintree Spectres and the stories surrounding them come to your attention then, Rob? What drew it to you?
I did a bit of research to see if there were any horses with paranormal names that might have won the Grand National. Yeah. And it goes back about 150 years. And in all that time, there were only two. Yeah. And those weren't particularly brilliant. One was Red Alligator. Yes. In 1968, which, I dare say Richard Freeman would get excited about spotting the red alligator. And the other one, 1895, was the Wild Man from Borneo. They're both a bit cryptozoological. Yeah. But, that's it. I was quite surprised. I thought there was bound to be something. But no. Anyway, how I came to be aware of the Aintree Spectres. I have to admit that the Aintree Spectres is a name that I've given to the phenomenon. For obvious reasons, there's only so many names that you can use in the lexicon of weirdness. And what I'm going to talk about this evening, I had my original article about it was in Fortean Times back in December 2020, which, for those of your listeners who are sad enough to want to grab hold of it, it was FT 399, pages 38 to 42.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of years ago, I went and gave a presentation at Weird Weekend North, Weird Weekend North 2022.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned a couple of minutes ago about serendipity. And this is what happened in that I was contacted by a guy about his own experience, and then he kind of like said, oh, well, while I'm at it, you might like to hear what happened to my brother. But the story that he told me is one of my top 6 road ghost stories amongst everything that I've got.
Mm.
So, with your permission, I thought I would tell you that one as a bit of an aperitif.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Of course. I'd be delighted to share that with us.
Okay. So, it was following my article in 14 Times entitled Strange Stories from Southport that I was contacted by Glenn Preston, which is a pseudonym. And he told me that back in mid to late August 1975, when he was only 15 years of age, he went on a weekend trip to Shropshire with his mum and dad. And he stayed at a campsite in either Arley or Hampton Road, which are south of Bridgnorth. He was particularly interested in seeing the locomotive at Bewdley Station on the Severn Valley Railway. It's a bit of a train buff. And the steam train that they were on got delayed at Hampton Road Station, and everybody disembarked onto the sunny platform to wait. Interestingly, this included a carriage full of nuns. Right. A Spitfire aircraft flew over, and someone remarked that there was an air show nearby. Later that fine Sunday afternoon, the family left for their home on Merseyside. Then, about 15 to 20 minutes into the journey, which places them probably north of Bridgnorth on the A442, which is the most direct route, they were out in the countryside, when suddenly, to their left, behind, at first it was behind a low hedge, they saw the quite unmistakable shape of Concorde. What was ridiculous and remarkable was that its height, speed, and angle made it appear that it was only just taking off. It was about 10 to 15 feet off the ground. Glenn recalls that the undercarriage was still deployed, but accepts that his memory might have been filling gaps. But all 3 of the family commented that it was just an ordinary farmer's field that it had seemingly taken off from. Concorde was parallel to them, also heading north, and about 100 yards away. Glenn can't remember if there was any noise, which you'd pretty well expect if it was so close. But again, this might just be his memory. The airplane then disappeared from view behind hedges and trees as they continued up the road, and it was then nowhere to be seen. Glenn knew that they weren't near any airfield, and has tried to rationalise this event over the years. Maybe it was an air show, but the nearest major air show is at Cosford, which is just outside Wolverhampton. But there was no show in 1975, and Concorde only featured in 1986 and 1987. So maybe it was taking off from an airstrip, which was in the Severn Valley beyond the field. But the runway required would also be capable of handling a Boeing 747 jumbo jet. No such airstrip exists. Maybe it was experiencing trouble, and so was flying very low, but surely this would have made the national press. So maybe it was something else altogether, but Glenn has no doubt it was unmistakably a Concorde. Therefore, I say that this episode must be filed as both strange and unsolved. So, I mean, a lot of people argue that, ghosts are like the spirits of the dead. Well, I'm not sure what the spirit of a Concorde might be. But there you go.
Well, I'm always intrigued by ghost plane sightings, because obviously not far from where I am, Rob, is the Peak District, which is notorious for people seeing bombers flying over there that shouldn't be anywhere near the area. And once again, they are often unique in the fact that the reason people are often taken by them is the fact that they cannot hear a sound.
Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I now move on. And these are what you might describe as bizarre and frightening events that took place over a number of years just outside the village of Aintree, which is in the Merseyside borough of Sefton. It's not in Liverpool. Now, normally when I was doing my presentation at the Weird Weekend North, I was able to show maps. It's a bit hard on the podcast, isn't it?
It is.
So therefore, if you and your listeners are prepared to just sit back and listen for a moment, I will try and describe the maps about the location and the related views as well. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are certain clear geographical characteristics about the area. Aintree itself is something of a bit of a sausage-shaped location because you've got on a big loop the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, and then which sort of comes from the west and then loops round on the east side and then goes back up to the north. In between this, cutting right across it, is the River Alt, which is a comparatively slow-moving, fairly flat river. The Aintree race course is actually on the opposite side of the canal from Aintree village itself. But, intriguing coincidence, in Aintree, at the bottom of Bullbridge Lane, which is one of the main thoroughfares that I will be talking about, is a pub called the Blue Anchor. And it's actually in that pub that I was told my first road ghost story by my friend and colleague that I used to work for. And I use his story as the old man of Halsall Moss, and it's all gone on from there. So it's a small world, as they say. But what you've then got, leading away northwards from the centre of the village, away from the racecourse, you've got a road called Bullbridge Lane. Now, it leads to, shock horror, Bull Bridge. When you get that goes over the River Alt, and then when you go onto the other side, it becomes Spencer's Lane, which then goes in a loop which is like north and then east, and ends up just over the canal again in Waddicker. Cutting through is the M57, but that's an irrelevance to the story because most of the things that we've got that happened were before the M57 was actually built. Now, what I would say is that the length of the field in question is, which is on the one side, on its southern side, is the River Alt itself. And the length of the field is approximately 700 metres on the main largest side, and then its width ranges from 200 to about 360 metres at its widest. Now, I have in front of me the view from Bullbridge over the River Alt, which is looking in a southeasterly direction. To your right, what you have is a load of like bushes and brambles and so on for about 20 yards, and then there's a big hedge that runs parallel to the river with the occasional tree, and on the other side of it there is a whole string of houses. On your left, you've got the field in question, which is big, open and flat, typical farmer's field for growing crops. But what's important to note, therefore, is that if anything strange was going on in that field, you've got a lot of houses that overlook it. So when you get over Bullbridge, to your right, there is a turning and a track, concreted track, from the road down into the field, which is about one tractor's width. So this, I believe, is the main entrance for things that happened. But you can see that it's just a straightforward in and out for farm equipment and such like. When it comes to me getting information and testimonies, I started by, as I said, Glenn had come to me and said, "Do you want to know what happened to my brother?" I, of course, said yes. So I started everything by recording the testimonies from Glenn and his family. And to see if there were other witnesses, I had what I call a call piece published in the Aintree and Melling issue of the Champion newspaper on the 14th of November 2018. So the Champion, they're the people, those are the 3B newspapers which go into every house, and they're really helpful there. They're the ones who managed to get me a lot of testimonies to do with the old man of Halsall Moss. So the responses that I got back included people saying that the field in question was the site of a fatal air crash on Grand National Day in 1964. The journalist and broadcaster Nancy Spain and Joan Werner Laurie, who was the editor of She magazine, were both killed. However, I drew one related story, which I will come to. But firstly, I'll return to Glenn's older brother, Jeff, who was in his late teens at the time, and he missed the last bus one early autumn night in either 1967 or 1968. He was walking over Bull Bridge, heading for the family home on Spencer's Lane. It was between 11 o'clock and 11:30 at night, and the night was clear. As I say, this was before the M57 motorway was built. That stretch opened in 1972. And there was no street lighting. Therefore, there was total darkness. It was at this point that Jeff noticed lights to the right of him about 150 yards away in the field. What he saw was a group of up to 9 men carrying bright, burning torches walking along the bank of the River Alt, heading away from him southeast towards Fazakerley. They were wearing greyish robes with pointed hoods, similar in shape to those worn by the Ku Klux Klan, and marching 2 or 3 abreast in line, like soldiers. Understandably, Jeff was frightened and ran to his home, where he got his father out of bed. They went to the upstairs back bedroom window and could still see the torchlit procession over the fields. Jeff was very scared, mainly because he didn't know who or what the procession was, and decided to sleep on his parents' bedroom floor. Glenn then tells about their parents, who are now both deceased, driving home from Fazakerley around 9:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. one October or November night in the early 1970s. Their father had collected their mother from bingo. They crossed Bull Bridge and saw in the same field to their right a dozen or so men holding bright burning torches and wearing robes, some with pointed hoods. They were standing in a circle as if they were involved in some magical gathering. The parents didn't stop to look, but saw the group clearly through the car windows. It was fully dark at the time, and the father related later that it would have been impossible for the group not to have been seen by many dozens of people who used that road. Despite this, his inquiries over the next few days as to whether or not anyone else had seen the group was met with blank looks. He wondered if perhaps this had been some sort of Halloween event, but seemed to think that it was too early or too late for this. He had quite expected it to be the talk of the village and was perplexed by the fact that seemingly no one else had seen it. Quite by chance, sometime later, and unprompted by Glenn, the father of one of his friends, who was a security guard at the BICC works in Melling, told him of seeing the same or similar event whilst travelling that stretch of road on his moped during the early hours. These events could be dismissed as nothing more than observations of a group of people with lighted torches and robes messing about in a field. However, in the late 1980s, the father was chatting to an old friend of his over a drink in the Horse and Jockey pub in Melling. His friend had long since emigrated to Canada, but was back in the country revisiting families and friends. The conversation turned to the subject of the supernatural, and so the father started to relate his sighting of the group with torches and robes. But before he got very far, his old friend interjected, saying that he knew exactly what he was going to say he had seen. He then related how he had seen exactly the same sight while cycling back from a dance late one night. but he'd observed the event from the Leeds-Liverpool Canal on the other side of the field. Significantly, the time when he had seen the lighted torch-bearing group had occurred during the early stages of World War II, when strict blackout procedures were in force, which was well over 40 years previously. The one response I got from my call was from a Mrs. H. Her testimony was as follows. It was about 7 p.m. one evening around Christmas 40 or so years ago, which would place it in the mid to late 1970s. I was in our car with my husband and young daughter travelling back to our home in Melling, having been to see my mother-in-law in the Fazakerley area. It was very dark and it was misty. We crossed Bull Bridge onto Spencer's Lane when immediately to our left and close to the road we saw a group of people all dressed in light outfits that looked like those worn by the Ku Klux Klan. There were around half a dozen of them, although it might have been as few as 4 or as many as 8. It was difficult to judge in the circumstances, and given that we passed them at a normal driving speed of around 30 miles per hour. Their appearance was very scary and a bit spooky, and they looked as though they were getting ready to do something. My immediate reaction was, what are they up to? None of them appeared to be carrying anything, and there were definitely no lights or torches. Naturally, we didn't stop to investigate as we were very, very frightened. I am a lifelong resident of Melling and was in my 30s at the time. I have seen nothing like what we saw that night, before or since. My husband, who is now deceased, and I never forgot this experience and talked about it on many occasions, although we never heard of anyone else having the same or similar experience. So that there is a series of events of apparently the same phenomenon taking place in the same location over a long period is definitely strange. Several witnesses naturally inferred a paranormal source. But what is striking is how long Jeff Preston saw the spectres for on the night in question. Jeff's running maybe the best part of 700 metres home, waking his father, and them watching the procession will have involved many minutes. Paranormal events tend to be quite transient and short. The fact that the spectres all behave like people dressed up, rather than performing fantastical feats or fading from sight in some ghostly way, suggests a flesh and blood explanation. But given that the field is so large and open, and close to a busy road and housing, any group of people undertaking the activities described should expect to be readily observed and challenged, not least by the police and or the farmer who uses the field. If it was some clandestine or magical group, then how did the participants get there? As in none of the events described was there reference to a series of cars parked up on the side of the road by the field. If any group was undertaking some magical practices, then there must be something particular and special about the field for them to A, keep returning, and B, place themselves at such risk of observation. To investigate if there was some past presence on the field, I studied available maps at Liverpool Central Library. Historically, the core of Aintree was a small linear settlement to the east of the centre of the current township, heading up Bullbridge Lane, i.e. towards and close to the field in question. In all maps back to 1786, the field was simply farmland. The Hennet map, which is from 1830, shows a mill on the River Alt, and it can be noticed that the River Alt meandered quite a lot at that time, and this has since then been straightened to what it is now. The map also marks a chapel on the far left of the crossroads, which are approximately 200 metres up from Bull Bridge. Apparently, this was a Methodist chapel. If you compare maps, the chapel was built between 1818 and 1830, which means that it is not historic. In 1847 to 49, Carr House Farm is in the middle of the field, and chapel cottages are seen where the chapel was recorded previously. Looking at current maps, it appears that the works building near to the motorway is on the site of Carr House Farm, and the road to it follows the original farm road. Now, interestingly, as a bit of an aside, what is interesting is that where you've got the field, on the opposite side to it, on the other side of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, there is, in big letters, Hob Lane. Big, long lane in what is now Kirby. It no longer exists. It's been subsumed within Kirby, although there is like a walkway which has retained the name. But we all know that the use of the word hob has sinister or paranormal suggestions in the name. So that's one to bear in mind. A local farmer told me that the field is good farming land, which was part of Lord Sefton's estate, which was sold off in the 1950s or the 1960s for building houses. But as it is on a floodplain, it is unlikely that building will ever take place. Consequently, the land is farmed by tenant farmers. So there has never been anything special historically about the field, like a medieval monastery that might attract a magical group. I asked the farmer if he or anyone he knows had witnessed any specters. He said his family had been in the area since 1933, and he has been around for over 60 years and knows a lot of people. He has never seen anything or known anyone who has seen anything, but he has heard rumours at times. Via an intermediary, I also contacted the current owners of Mill Farm, which overlooks the field from across the River Alt. They've lived there for 30 years and have never seen or heard anything, which suggests that nothing similar has occurred since the late 1980s. Was it to do with Christian fundamentalists or even the Ku Klux Klan? Given the witnessed apparel and suspicion some sort of magical group might be involved, I asked my Weird Weekend North friend Steve Jones, a practicing pagan, if he was aware of any such group in the area. He posted my question on his Facebook account and that of other pagan groups. This resulted in a testimony from Mark, one of his pagan friends, which I will read to you now. Whilst at university in Liverpool during the mid-1980s, I was interested in spiritual things and was looking for a form of Christianity I could feel comfortable with. I dabbled with a number of opportunities, including being born again around 1985-86. However, I had reservations because it didn't feel right, and I was not persuaded by a Billy Graham revival meeting at Anfield in Liverpool in 1984. Nevertheless, I allowed a girl I fancied to talk me into going to a meeting of evangelicals in a sports hall out in, as he recalls, in Kirby. The evangelical group appeared to have been well established for some time, reflected in the fact that it had hired the sports hall for the evening. There were lots of people there, mostly people in their 20s and 30s, although some were older. I went twice, but each occasion caused me deep disquiet. It was full-on stuff. I remember people speaking in tongues and reciting long Bible passages from memory in trance-like states. Everything, in fact, except the wrestling of snakes. As a newbie and outsider, I found that I could see no main focus. Nevertheless, it was clear that there was a secretive inner circle whose members definitely led things. What stood out for me was the treatment of a former member who had apparently gone to the dark side. No more Star Wars. I remember people being instructed not to interact with him in any way and to go to the other side of the street to ignore him, etc., as he was, quote, controlled by the devil. I found it scary when talking to people that some identified themselves as social workers, lawyers, teachers, and similar, with almost all saying that they were not from the area but had been called there by God. These people absolutely believed in the physicality of evil and the devil. I never went back after the second visit. I asked Mark if he thought that dressing up in Ku Klux Klan type clothes and parading around a field at night with burning torches might be the sort of thing that such a secretive inner circle might get up to, away from the main group. He said that given the level of weirdness he'd witnessed, he guesses that this could well be the case. It should be noted that the main sports centre in Kirby is no more than 3 miles from the field in question, less than a 10-minute drive. Following on from Mark's story, I contacted Merseyside Anti-Fascist Network to see if they were aware of any local right-wing Ku Klux Klan-type groups that could be linked to such Christian fundamentalists. No one had heard of anything that could be related, although there were one or two inevitable speculations. By February 2019, I felt that I had exhausted all reasonable avenues of inquiry. But by chance, in May, I read Tom Sleeman's Haunted Wirral article in the Wirral Globe, local free weekly paper. What caught my eye was reference to attacks vandalising graves in Ford Cemetery in Bootle, which is just over 3 miles from Bulbridge Lane, in 1974, where witnesses described weird hooded figures in robes reminiscent of those worn by the Ku Klux Klan, only the hoods had bizarre, exaggerated noses made from cones of fabric stitched onto them. Some argued that they were members of an ancient sect of druid-like warriors known as the Lily White Boys. He also referred to other graveyard desecrations in Bootle and Birkenhead as late as 1982. The latter incident had the Lily White Boys waving swords and chasing a couple at 1 a.m. to the girls' home on Sumner Road, which was at least a quarter of a mile away. Tom's website says they are a sun-worshipping cult predating Christianity, which practices animal and allegedly once child sacrifice. They are referenced in the ancient folk song called Green Grow the Rushes O, with the line, two lily white boys clothed all in green. So what I've got here, because I appreciate that some of your listeners won't necessarily be familiar with the song, I've got a YouTube recording of it here, which I will play the first little bit for you. It's performed by King Solomon Singers, recorded live at St. Josaphat Church, Chicago, July 26, 2015.
I'll sing you one note. Green gold, rushes on. What is your word? One is one and all alone, and evermore shall be so. I'll sing you two. Oh, green gold, rushes on. What is your two? The lily white boys covered all in green. Oh, one is one and all alone, and evermore shall be so.
So, there you have the reference to the Lily White Boys. Apparently, they've been seen for hundreds of years across the country, but on Merseyside they congregate at specific times of year at 4 locations. Wirral's Bidston Hill, Bowring Park on the Liverpool-Huyton border, Delamere Forest, and a field between Wadicker and Melling. Of course, this is the field that I had been investigating. Tom describes one incident as follows. One harvest moon night in the 1970s, Brian and Tina, a young couple travelling homewards down Bulbridge Lane in Aintree, saw a circle of figures in green robes standing in a field around a bonfire, and one of the figures was holding what looked like a small doll-like effigy. Brian got out of his car near the River Alt to get a better look at the strange ceremony, and asked an old passerby what was going on. "It's the Lily White Boys burning a child," said the oldster gravely, and he advised Brian not to go anywhere near the group or they would kill him too. "You're joking," said Brian. "That's some Guy Fawkes thing they're burning, isn't it?" But the old man shook his head solemnly. Brian raced home and called the police, but only the charred remains of a sheep was found in the smouldering vestiges on the following day. Tom also refers to incidents in World War II. One had ARP wardens investigating a huge bonfire in Bowring Park during a blackout and being faced with green-robed men and naked women dancing around the fire, with 5 or 6 of these men wielding scythes and swords. This ties in time-wise with the experience of Glenn and Jeff's father's friend who had emigrated to Canada. I asked Jeff and Mrs. H if these descriptions fitted with the figures they'd saw. Jeff didn't recall any exaggerated noses, but then the figures he saw were at a distance and heading away from him. And if the colour is a light green, then it would be quite difficult to distinguish this in the torchlight from the greyish colour that he recalls. Similarly, for Mrs. H, A light green outfit could well appear white or light-coloured when partly illuminated by car headlights. When travelling at 30 miles per hour, she could not recall any exaggerated noses. So what's going on? or was going on, we should say.
Yes.
I tried contacting Tom Slayman via the Wirral Globe so as to compare notes and sources and ask if he knew whether the robes were dark or light green. Unfortunately, Tom didn't get back to me. It's intriguing that his stories about the Lily-White boys tie in well with the first and second-hand testimonies that I've collected in terms of both appearance and some of the actions. His earliest references to incidents were in World War II, and his last reference was in the early 1980s, again consistent with testimonies that I collected. It can be concluded that these specters, or whatever they are, have been seen on several occasions from the mid to late 1960s to the mid to late 1970s, and possibly as far back as World War II and as recent as the early 1980s. There was great consistency in where and what was witnessed, suggesting a single, if infrequent, phenomenon. Understandably, witnesses believed something paranormal or supernatural could be involved because they were so scared. But everything points to human involvement. Of course, the outfits were not necessarily Ku Klux Klan related because pointed hats of a conical form, caparothes, if that's the Spanish pronunciation, in the Black Country we say capirotes, are part of the uniforms of some brotherhoods during Easter observances and reenactments in some areas during Holy Week in Spain.
Yes.
Religious robes specific to a cult, such as the Lily-White boys, would make a lot of sense. Nevertheless, it would be imprudent to exclude the possibility that the motivation behind the activities was malevolent and or political. The maps did not indicate any explicit ancient presence on the site which might attract a magical group on a recurring basis. However, Captain Moonlight, which I presume is a pseudonym, states Aintree derives its name from the Anglo-Saxon an trial, meaning one tree, and that one tree was an ancient sprawling oak, sacred to the Druids and the Lily-White boys' cult of nature worshippers. Alternatively, it might simply be that it is large, reasonably out of the way, and convenient for the participants. The timing of Mark's experiences with Christian fundamentalists is not inconsistent with the sightings, because this would only stretch dates into the mid-1980s. But it would seem that the phenomenon had ceased since at least the late 1980s. But if it was the Lily-White boys, are they still active, or has the cult disbanded, at least on Merseyside? Perhaps it simply withered on the vine as its members grew old and died, and their children or other potential members turned their backs on its continuance. I Google researched as much as I can about the Lily-White boys, and other than references to Green Grow the Rushes O, Harry Cookson 1960 play of this name, and a story of this title by William Maxwell, I have not been able to find anything wholly independent of Tom Slayman's writings. I asked Dr. David Clark, of Fortune Times and Sheffield Hallam University, if he was aware of the cult through his folklore network, and Steve Jones again through his pagan contacts, but both drew a blank. Perhaps the Lily-White boys are a literary device created by Tom Slayman to provide a backstory to actual local events or stories that he has picked up on. After all, I am unlikely to be the only person that witnesses have spoken to about this phenomenon. Unfortunately, Tom hasn't got back to me. Nevertheless, there seems to be the distinct possibility that some form of sect was involved, and maybe in the early 1980s its members changed tack and followed an entryism route into the local Christian fundamentalist group for whatever reason, and were the secretive inner circle that Mark commented upon. Such a possible link would be all pure speculation. However, it is safe to say that it is highly unlikely that a Spanish Brotherhood would travel to Merseyside to practice their observances and reenactments in the middle of a farmer's field, in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter. Those of you who know me will know that I sometimes experience subtle, strange synchronicities with Fortean Times. So, after chatting with David Sutton, the Fortean Times editor, about publishing my Aintree Spectres article, I opened up my newly arrived issue of Fortean Times to see reference to a 5G mast being set ablaze at Aintree near the M57 motorway. Naturally, I checked out exactly where the 5G mast was situated and found that it was on the site of the old Chapel Cottages, which is right on the opposite side of Spencer's Lane from the field where the Spectres were seen brandishing their burning torches. So maybe it wasn't local vandals that set the mast alight, responding to coronavirus conspiracy theories. Maybe the Spectres had made a belated comeback and torched it. After all, they carry the necessary tools. Now, following the publication of the article in Fortean Times, some people wrote in with their own speculations and thoughts about it. And I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes highlighting what these thoughts and suggestions were.
Of course.
One was Ryan Sherlow, who is really good. He's been at Weird Weekend North himself, and a great guy to know. What he highlighted, having been involved with the military, he's a civilian, but I think with the civil service or whatever, he's been involved with the military at times. And what struck him was that people who are, on the bases often get totally bored and like to do pranks and so on and so forth. And looking at the dates, he's wondering whether the fact that there was a big USAF base at Birchwood, which is just down the road, whether some of them decided to dress up and do weird things like this. So, you can't dismiss that idea. And possibly you had some clan penetration in the US military. But, it's one idea which, I can't dismiss, but, with any phenomenon like this, so much of it is speculation and fun to think about. Steve Jones, again, got in touch with me. He'd been to the Isle of Man looking for Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Yep. And with Richard Freeman. And while they'd been over there, they visited the Manx Museum. In the folklore section, he spotted a small photograph and paragraph which talked about the White Boys, which was as I say, the photo was of a costume and a black and white outfit. But when you analysed it, whilst it did look a bit KKK type, it didn't have the pointed hood. And it was also more linked to mumming, and the White Boys would go around more around it to, I think he says, Christmas time. Yes. So it's something that it's an interesting connection though from that. And finally, there was a letter to Fortean Times from Dean Ballinger, all the way in New Zealand, and he wrote in and he said it's speculation, but. There used to be a group in Ireland called the White Boys. The first known Irish political secret society, the White Boys, first appeared in Tipperary in autumn of 1761. This was the Enclosures Act, permitted local landlords to seize village common pasture for their own use. So in response, they would gather together and go and destroy the ditches and fences erected by the landlords. So they carried on with that sort of thing over the years. And of course, they then passed on the white boy custom of assembling by night in white garments, spread to the American South by way of Irish immigrants, and was adopted after the Civil War by the Ku Klux Klan. So what Dean hypothesized was Liverpool has always had a strong link with the Irish. And so maybe there is some way that the Lily White Boys are derived or descended from the White Boys political group. So, yeah, it's interesting thought, and I welcome these suggestions. Absolutely. So what are my conclusions? Well, before Tom Sleeman's article, my best guess was that the Aintree Spectres were a small group of local Christian fundamentalists who enjoyed the excitement of dressing up in Ku Klux Klan type apparel and performing rituals with burning torches in the middle of the night, perhaps with some political backdrop. Pointing the finger at the Lily-White Boys, or whatever they might be called, has obvious attractions, but there are no evidential sources I could find independent of Tom's writings. But of course, there is a problem that secret sects are, by definition, secret.
Yes.
Therefore, assuming that the Lily-White Boys actually exist, or existed, it will be virtually impossible to confirm if they were involved, short of a member or former member coming forward. And one of the reasons why something may not have happened in recent times, you have to bear in mind that there is a ubiquity of mobile phones these days. And if anybody went prancing around a field burning torches dressed in like the Ku Klux Klan, people would be straight out, whip the mobile phones out, record it, and then upload it. And, it'd be a bit hard to do that these days. So, unless someone who participated in such events or knows someone who did is prepared to make an admission, which might simply be something along the lines of, "It was me and me mates having a laugh," I will adopt a fortune stance and keep an open mind on exactly what lies behind this very peculiar phenomenon.
What a strange conundrum, Rob.
It is. But before we finish, I'm going to tell you about a strange event that happened while I was talking about the Aintree Spectres. This was to do when I gave a presentation at Weird Weekend North 2022. So I was first on the Saturday, as is my wont. It means I've got it over with and I can relax for the rest of the event.
And relax.
Yeah. and then I write up notes so that I can write up a piece about the event for the Fortune Times. Anyway, right. I strutted my stuff. I gave my presentation. But following it, Jane hurried to me, she was sat on the front row. She hurried to me and asked why I had repeated it from an earlier Weird Weekend North rather than deliver a new one. Surprised, I explained that it was the very first occasion I had ever given the talk, which perturbed her greatly. She told me she had seen me do the exact same presentation before, even down to the jokes and asides. Oh, no comment there. I needed to make way for the next speaker, and so later when I chatted to her, she explained that she sometimes had similar inexplicable episodes, but was adamant about having seen me present Aintree Spectres in the past. Her daughter, who was with her, added that when they were outside at the break, they had heard someone else say that they had seen me do it before as well, and pointed him out. I went over to Jerry and asked him about this, and he confirmed that he believed he had seen my talk in the past, although he described it as more a strong case of déjà vu. At the lunchtime, I asked if anyone else might have had a similar experience. And lo and behold, Greg caught me on the afternoon and told me of having seen my complete presentation just before, just like Jane. He'd mentioned it to his colleagues at the time, which greatly puzzled them. This is all very strange. I had never previously delivered my Aintree Spectres talk, and yet 3 people say that I had. I asked if they'd read my article in Fortune Times, but they were clear it had no influence. Did some sort of time slip take place? Or has the COVID-19 pandemic affected some people's memories in an unknown way? It is certainly somewhat unique for something so fortunate to take place at a Fortune event. So, I can't explain that. It was totally and utterly weird, but the people were all adamant. So there you go.
That bit reminds me of an incident that happened to me many years ago. When I say many years ago, Rob, it's probably about 25 years ago. And I went to meet friends where I used to...
When you were 13?
Yes, when I was a young whippersnapper, yes. And I'd often go sort of once a month down to London because I've got a few friends who'd kind of decamp from Sheffield down there. So I used to go down pretty regularly. And we arranged to meet up for afternoon drinks one Saturday. And a couple of friends were coming over. One of them's a football journalist who works for The Guardian these days, John Bruin. And he came along with a friend. And we were all sat there chatting. And we both were absolutely adamant that we knew each other. But neither of us could remember how we'd met, how we knew each other, and where this feeling came from. But it was both of us. And we just couldn't get our heads around the fact... We got on like a house on fire, and we couldn't comprehend how we both had this feeling of familiarity, despite the fact that that was clearly the first time we'd ever met each other.
In a previous life, that somebody would say.
Yes, because we weren't even from the same city. He didn't go to university in Sheffield. I didn't knock about where he grew up. So it was very odd, but we both felt like we knew each other.
Yeah.
So it's strange. I mean, have you had that before, Rob? Because obviously it's a very specific case with lots of nuance to it. Were you sort of surprised, even with the weirdness that you often investigate?
Yeah, I was pretty flabbergasted by it. I mean, I don't have strange things happen to me, if I could describe it like that. And yeah, I can't explain it. I mean, the woman concerned, so she was, probably in the 50s, very down to earth, and she was greatly perturbed by it. So it's not the sort of thing that you'd make up.
No.
And so I was extremely sympathetic. Anthony Peake's book, Cheating the Ferryman.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
No, I've heard of it, but I've never had a chance to read it.
It's very good. And Tony and I got talking, and I did a video podcast for him. But we found out that for many, many years, we lived about half a mile away from each other. Me here in Spittal and him in Spittal as well, just on another part of the estate. And we never knew each other. We reckon we could have had a lot of stuff to talk about in the Three Stag. But he lives down Sussex way now, I think.
Yeah.
But he's a really good guy. I mean, maybe you should interview him. But it's Cheating the Ferryman, where he analyses a lot of published, proven scientific stuff. To paraphrase it, if I'm understanding it correctly, he reckons that what we do is we live the same life over and over and over.
Oh.
And but what happens is that each time you possibly do something that changes it, to possibly improve it.
Ah.
So I think in the one bit he talks about, he remembers like driving on the motorway, I think the M62, and then he thinks about something, then the next thing he realises is that a lorry has shed its load immediately in front of him, and he swerved. Something came to mind, and he swerved and survived. And so he kind of wonders whether in maybe a previous life he hadn't survived. But because so it's a really, really good book. I recommend it. But it's as if we live forever because we keep repeating the same life, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not. But it's an interesting hypothesis, and he argues it very well. So maybe if you take the stance in his book, then these people have seen me do it before in their previous life. Do you know what I mean? That's not the way to describe it, but you know what I'm going on about. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I suppose as well, going back to what's been going on with these spectres as well, I find that the sort of idea that it could be the Ku Klux Klan turning up quite odd, because they're not, or never really have been well established here. I know in my personal experience, Rob, the only kind of indication I've ever been aware of is that they sort of had a bit of a to do in Birmingham in the mid to late 60s, where there was a sex set up, and I know they obviously had some associations with the BNP in the sort of late noughties, early, about 15 years ago. But other than that, they've never really been able to establish a foothold. Now, as you refer to, though, they're not really the kind of organisation that would sort of make themselves very well known because of the connotations and their history. Is this sort of one of those cases that is organic, Rob, and you're still looking for, if anybody else has seen something similar, as always, you're kind of looking out for more sort of meat for the bones of this particular story?
I think that it's run its course, to be blunt, because the most recent, I think I said, was in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And it's very sporadic. I mean, it could be that somebody reads my article or my call in the newspaper and goes, oh, wow, yes, I remember that. My dad told me about it or something like that. But I didn't have many witnesses come forward. I mean, I had enough.
Yeah.
But I can't see, many new ones coming up. But, that's just the nature of, this sort of research.
Yeah.
It doesn't worry me. Of course, there was enough meat for the article, for the presentations, and I think it's a very, very intriguing story.
Yeah.
Because you can't pin it down.
Yeah.
To me, clearly, it's not to do with like road ghosts and that. You can go, oh right, okay, these things happen. And people, see these things. But this, to me, was clearly, humans dressed up.
Yeah.
And which begs the question of why. But as I say, unless somebody fesses up and says, it was me, I think that's it, really.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing stranger than people sometimes who come together.
Queer as folk, as they say up north.
Indeed. And I know, obviously, you look at these kind of things, and obviously some of the ingredients that you've mentioned about the desecration of graveyards and churchyards and things. And obviously there was a lot of things like that going on in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
It kind of ties up with what was going on down at Highgate Cemetery with the Reverend John Manchester and the ilk and all those kinds of things, and people claiming that
vampire.
Yeah.
Highgate vampire.
All kinds of strange things. So it wouldn't surprise me. It often occur. I mean, I remember as a kid in the 80s there was a spate of vandalism cases going on in graveyards and things being desecrated, and a lot of people just kind of pushed it to one side as just bored kids, Rob, which is often sometimes, bored kids can often sometimes create a Fortean mystery all of their own, but it is just peculiar, isn't it? Because like you say, this area is nondescript, there's no real religious history to it, there's nothing that would sort of symbolise this as a particularly special place, and yet we've got this very odd series of witness accounts of very unusual activity going on.
Yeah, odd is the word. It's just so. It's in many ways, out of all the research that I've done, this one just stands out as a bit of an outlier. And it's good for that, rather than repeating the usual, the same old stuff, just in a different location. But it was good fun researching it.
Yeah. So is there, before I let you go then, Rob, is there any new cases that you've had a few accounts come forward that you've kind of gone, I've got myself another hotspot? Because we've obviously mentioned before previously we've had strange things in Lincolnshire and Scunthorpe and the like.
I said that I've got about 180, which includes the Spectres. But I'm currently working on one which is quite local to me, which came out, as I say, just by happenstance when I said to somebody that, oh yes, I write about road ghosts, 14 times. Oh, and you told about a mother and daughter driving along a particular road, and they see a car coming in the opposite direction, headlights and then it turns off in front of them, and then when they get to that point, there is no road. And it's a long straight road, and this car just disappeared. Yeah. And then a few weeks later, I hope I've got the right way round, they were driving along, same road, but, further along, and suddenly this this thing steps out in front of them into the middle of the road. They scream, they slam on the brakes, they run over him, whatever it is, and they get out, they look on the front of the car, under the car, around the car, and there's nothing. So they jump in, head off, and they called in at the local Tesco, beyond the end of the road, to get something. This was late at night, and the girl behind the counter said, "Oh, you look like you've seen a ghost." And she said, "I have." So you get that story, and then you think, "Oh, okay." And then you put a little thing in the local newspaper or whatever. And the irony is that we put it in Cheshire Live with friendly journalists, and the next thing you know, you're getting stories of blokes on motorbikes seeing road ghosts in South Africa.
Yeah, the classic story. Yes. And one where there's an Admiralty type building in Cape Town where 3 officers came across some ghosts. Now, the way that comes about, and this is the serendipity of it all, is that I put it into Cheshire Live, but it's part of the Reach group, and they cover MSM and they cover the Mirror, and so they copy it, put it on their websites, and the websites are read across the world. Yeah.
So suddenly you get. I've got stories from down in Devon where there is a very strange valley, which our witnesses refer to as Spooky Hollow, and there's some pretty scary stuff down there. Yeah, but the thing is, I've written these stories up as articles for Fortune Times and sometimes for the Ghost Club Journal, and a lot of them are sitting waiting to be published.
Yes.
So David Sutton, he's super, but he's got what he calls the Gandy pile, which all these articles. Because I'm retired now, and I can spend time when I pick up the story. I can run with it, and then I write it up. And of course, then what do? I submit it to Fortune Times, and Dave probably goes, "Oh no, not another one." I was fortunate with the Lincolnshire series, which started with the Ruskington Horror. That ended up just by luck, not by design. There's been 9 articles. Yeah. But Fortune Times can't, much as I might like it, Fortune Times can't have, and this month is the next in Rob Gandy's many articles. He's got to spread it out. And sometimes when you've got the witnesses who give you the stories, then you have to say, well, it might be next year. I mean, I've been chased by 1 or 2 witnesses. What's happened? I'm thinking, oh my God, it's been it's best part of 3 years or 4 years, and it's not been published yet. But it's beyond my control, and I think Fortune Times is a fantastic magazine, and I just like to support it by writing articles that I hope people like.
Absolutely. Well, it's quite funny you mention that. I was sorting my collection out last night, just double checking everything, Rob, and seeing which issues I need to do, and it's unfortunately I'm now entering the phase of it's the really old expensive ones I need.
Sorry, what's that?
For the Fortune Times.
Sorry, what are you doing? You're trying to go the complete set?
I am, yeah. I've got my collection starts at 61.
Well, you can get the compendium books.
Yes.
Are you including those when you're trying to get some of them?
No, I'm a geek, Rob, so I want a complete collection. So I'm very.
I think you're pushing your. I mean, I go back. I've got originals going back to, I think, FT30.
Yeah.
My first one, I think, was FT34, something like that.
Yeah.
And I got some of the previous ones, but I think before FT30, I rely on the compendium books that they've done on that.
Yeah. When it was the news, wasn't it then? The news?
I can't remember exactly which issue it switched to being 14 times. It was originally the news, the first ones.
Yeah. I've already seen the eye-watering price of some of the issues before 60, so I'll wait for that lottery win, I think, Rob.
Oh, well, I can sell you a few for a few £1,000.
I'll bear that in mind, my friend. So, Rob,
how many mugs would that mean? Yeah.
So, for anybody that's got an experience of a strange occurrence on one of Britain's roads, or even from further beyond, Rob, how can they supply you with their information and get in touch with you, sir?
Right. Well, my email address is, because I've got NTL World, which is old and I've had problems with, I've opened up some Gmail accounts. And there's one that I am using or trying to use, robgandyphh @gmail.com. All one word, robgandyphh. The PHH stands for Phantom Hitchhiker.
I will put a link to that, Rob, for you in the show notes, so if anybody wants that. So I just want to say thank you very much. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for telling us all about this very strange case and a couple of odd things around it as well. And let's hope it's not 3 years till the next time we have a chat about something strange lurking.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, if you've got all those 14 times, then you can look at my old articles.
Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Okay. Take care. Bye.